Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you so very much for joining me today. I am very sorry about the delay in our presentation, but I am very glad to be here for our Texas A&M AgriLife Extension program with the Houston Master Gardeners and Harris County Master Gardeners. We're so glad to have them here today to talk about vegetable gardening. Before we begin, I would like to just throw a couple of housekeeping out there. You can now watch our videos on YouTube if you go to our YouTube channel, or directly on our homepage at hcpl.net. What's really exciting for that, although if you are watching it on the homepage, there's not a place for comments. So if you go to our YouTube page, or if you're watching it on Facebook, please put all of your comments and questions in the comment box. That way we can read them and get to them on air today. I also would like to let everybody know that next week is our big Authorama program. We have 5 days of virtual author visits coming through on our Facebook page and YouTube page. So please join us. We have authors for children, teens, and adults coming by. I'd be really, really excited. And we're really glad to have everybody joining us. So without any further ado, we're going to jump right into fall vegetable gardening. And I'm going to invite our master gardener for today, Teresa C. And Teresa, good morning. How are you doing today?
Doing great. How about yourself, Brian?
Oh, I am doing fantastic. I'm excited. So just as a quick reminder, today we're doing fall vegetables. So if we have any spring vegetable questions, you got about half a year to wait before we talk about those, right? So we'll be getting
right. Yes.
For the next time. So Teresa, you take it away and we'll get to some questions in just a little bit.
Okay. So I am Teresa C. I'm a volunteer master gardener with Harris County, Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. And my main goal is to bring research-based information to the community. So on the next slide, it shows that we have a different talk, a different topic every month from January through October. One is through the Houston Library System. One is through HCC. They're free talks. Please join us. And on the next slide, we have a couple of links that you can get to us. Get into here and you could just find out all kinds of horticultural information, not just vegetable gardening, but trees, insects, just all kinds of things that you might be interested in. So we have a couple of people. We have Joanne, and I believe Brandy's with us also. That'll be plugging in some links for you. And then we also have Chevy, who is very good with vegetables, and she's going to be answering some vegetable questions. So let's go ahead and get started on the next slide. When you first want to set up, you want to think about where you're going to put that garden, whether it's a raised bed on the right or containers on the left, shown on the left. So you want to make sure you're getting at least 8 hours of sunlight. Now you'll hear some people say 6 hours. I would recommend going with the full 8 hours. Some vegetables really need 8 hours. So if you're going to go through the trouble of setting up, you might as well get in an area that you can get 8 full hours of sunlight. You need to have a good drainage, internal and external. The external drainage, you can kind of guess. If you're doing container gardening, you want to make sure that you have drainage. You want to make sure that water is able to drain through. So most people put drain holes on the bottom of their containers. Some people put it lower on the outside bottom of the container. So the reason why you need good drainage is because your plants don't want to have wet feet. Those roots do not want to stay wet with vegetable gardening. So that's the external drainage. The internal drainage is the soil itself, the media itself. You want to make sure whatever soil or combination of soils that you're using, it allows water to drain through. So I'm talking to you from Harris County. You might be listening from another county, another state. I even like to listen to talks from other countries, but I'm in Harris County, and in Harris County, we have clay soil. Clay soil does not allow water to drain through. So if you looked at clay soil under a microscope, it's like layers that just fit together, as opposed to sand. If you looked at sand under a microscope, it's like these little tiny boulders. You know, these little particles of sand are like boulders, and there's gaps between the sand particles. There are no gaps between clay, so water does not go through and drain. So you wouldn't want to scoop up soil from your yard and put it in your containers. Now, at this point, usually people are asking, well, what do you recommend for soil or soil combination? There's a local guy that talks on Saturday, Sunday morning talk radio that says 2 parts rose soil to 1 part compost. I think that's a great way to start. I have another recipe for you as well. I usually kind of lean more towards this recipe, 2 parts rose soil to 1 part compost. If you're going to spend any extra money, spend it on your soil, building that soil. Your plants can come along, but you want to make sure that you have a good base, good soil. So I heard another talk from a gentleman in California, and he was real good. He uses 3 even parts, 1 part compost, 1 part peat, and 1 part perlite. Now, mentally, I'm mixing these 3 items up in my head, and I thought, well, that should work. Now, I personally don't use it, but I can see why it would work. So that's just to give you another recipe. Now, he also said in place of the peat, you can use coir. Some people pronounce it coir. I guess that's more French, C-O-I-R. And in place of the perlite, you can use vermiculite or half and half perlite vermiculite. I have a tendency to stick with that first recipe, 2 parts rose soil to 1 part compost. So you want to also make sure that you're picking an area that is free of sunlight competition. So not only what sunlight is there right now, but think about what sunlight might be there or not be there in the future. So if you or a next door neighbor has planted a small tree, maybe a small oak tree, a small magnolia tree, there's a lot of trees that can get very big. An oak tree, magnolia tree, and others can block out a lot of sunlight. So you especially want to pay attention to your south and west side. That's where you're going to get your best sunlight, from the south and west. So pay attention that there's nothing that's going to be blocking out your sunlight in the near future as well. You also want to make sure that you can get water to your garden easily. Now, drip irrigation is ideal. That is the best way to water your garden. There might be a little bit of cost setting up, but once you're set up, you're going to save money on water, because the water that comes out goes directly over the area that you need the water. It doesn't get the leaves wet. It's ideal. Soaker hoses are still good, even hose in sprinklers. So a sprinkler on the end of the hose, that's fine. Just make sure that you're setting it up where you can get water out there easily. I find as I get older, the more I have to go through to accomplish a task, the less likely I'm going to want to accomplish that task. So I don't want to have to haul a hose out there and go through patio furniture and other containers to get to that garden bed. So try to make everything easy for yourself. Also, you want to make sure that you have good air circulation. We have microclimates in our gardens, in our yards. So you might notice if you go in your yard and in one area, it always seems kind of stagnant. And if you go in another area of your yard, you feel the slightest bit of air circulation on your skin. That's what you want. You want some kind of air circulation. If you set up your garden in an area that the air is stagnant, you're more likely, more prone to get plant diseases and insect infestation. So what you can do is, when you have some spots picked out where you think it would make a good garden area, 8 hours of sunlight and such, just put some chairs out there and sit out there different times a day, different days. And if you feel the slightest bit of air circulation on your skin surface, it's probably a good area to garden. Also, you want to make sure that the garden is visible. The more you see that garden, the more likely you'll be thinking about it and wanting to be in that garden. And with me, I try to make it as pleasant as possible. So I don't force myself to work 3 hours every time I go out there, or 6 hours. Sometimes I just grab my cup of coffee in the morning and plan to just look at things, look under leaves where naughty insects might be starting to accumulate. If you catch those early, you can take care of it before it becomes a problem. Also, poke your finger in the soil about to the first knuckle. And if the soil is the right moisture, then you're doing okay. But if you notice it's bone dry, then you might be thinking, okay, I need to check on that irrigation. The water's not getting there. On the reverse side, if it's too soppy, there you are with wet feet. The plant's having wet feet. That'll cause the roots to rot. So you'll know that you need to do something about the irrigation. So on the next slide, we have all different kinds of garden designs. And you can see that there's all different ways you can set up. There's a lot more than this that you can set up. The main thing you want to think about is, can you reach into that garden without having to lean on the garden to reach in? So you want to be able to reach in either from both sides, or some people like to or have to set up against a structure. So you'll be reaching in just from one side. So you want to be able to reach every single part of that garden bed, whether from one side or two, without having to lean or step into that garden. As you lean or step into that garden, you compress and compact that soil. And we want to have these little tiny air pockets in our soil. So as you lean or step into it, you're compressing and compacting that soil. Another thing to consider is the soil depth. I recommend 8 to 10 inches of soil depth. The reason why, I think, is in the fall, what's the biggest carrot I might want to grow? And then its roots. And in the spring, got to grow tomatoes. Tomatoes are very heavy feeders. And with that comes the need for a lot of root system. So those roots bring in food to that plant. So is there enough soil to allow it to grow all these roots? So on the next slide, you want to aim for a pH that's slightly acidic. So there is a pH scale that goes from 1 on your left to 14 on your right. I hope that shows the correct way to you. So 1 to 14. 1 is very acidic, 14 is very alkaline, with 7 being neutral. So you're aiming for a pH level slightly acidic, just slightly to the left of neutral. Now there's meters that you can get online, or some of your nurseries, some of your box stores, and they're about $10 to $12 for the less expensive ones. There's some that get very expensive. So for fall vegetable gardening and most of your vegetable gardening, you're aiming at a slightly acidic soil. Then you want to be working in compost. Compost is organic matter. After you first set up, you want to continue as the seasons go on. You want to continue to add compost. So in Harris County, we have 2 seasons, spring and fall. Other places, they do things different, but we have the 2 seasons, spring and fall. So if you can, incorporate more organic matter or compost into your garden bed before every season. Now, some people do it 2 to 4 weeks before they plan to plant their new crop. So after they take out their, say, spring crop, that's when they incorporate their compost and allow 2 to 4 weeks for it to kind of blend. What happens is we have all these wonderful microorganisms in our garden beds. There's actually billions of them, just billions of them. And they're working our soil for us. There's also my favorite friends, the earthworm. If there's good soil out there, they make their way to your garden beds and they work that soil, they eat through, and their excrement is actually good for your plants. So you want all these things to be going on. So that's why a lot of people add their compost 2 or 4 weeks before they plant their new plants. If you can't, that's fine too. It's just good to have new compost in your garden bed. Now, as far as the moisture, you want it moist, not dry, moist, not wet. People get sick of me saying that, but that is what you're aiming for. It's just a moist soil. And then you have some air in there, and you don't have to go fluffing your garden bed all the time. If you avoid leaning or stepping into that garden bed, then as these microorganisms work for you, as these earthworms work for you, they work through. And if you can imagine an earthworm working through your soil, it makes these little tiny air pockets in your soil that's good for it. So on the next slide, when you're getting your fertilizer, there's all different kinds of fertilizers that you can get. Make sure that you read the labels for each fertilizer, because each one is different. But notice on each one, on the left picture near the bottom, there's 3 numbers. On the right picture, around the middle of that picture, there's 3 numbers. So that first number is always nitrogen. And most of your vegetable gardening, especially fall vegetable gardening, you want that first number to somehow be higher. So you want more nitrogen. The second number is always phosphorus. The third number is always potassium. Some people call potassium potash. That's okay. It's the same thing. The words are interchangeable. So we're aiming for that first number to be higher, but you don't want to use strong doses of the fertilizer. And the best way I can think of to translate that thought, you can buy powder, granule, liquid. So let's say you have a liquid and you read the label and it says that you want to put 2 tablespoons to a gallon of water. Avoid putting it stronger than that, because if you make it strong, then you not only burn the plant, but you can also burn the roots of the plants. And when you think, I think about the roots all the time, because the roots are what feed that plant. Yes, you have photosynthesis going on through the leaves, but underneath you're putting in all this wonderful compost and all these fertilizers into the soil. And as that fertilizer breaks down, it's the roots that have to draw that food into the plant. So you want to avoid hurting those roots. So that's with a liquid fertilizer. If you have a granular fertilizer and the instructions say a cup of fertilizer, a 3/4 cup or maybe a 1/2 cup, and spread it and then work it into the soil. With that liquid fertilizer, if it said 2 tablespoons to a gallon, I'm going to back off and do maybe 1.5 tablespoons or maybe just 1 tablespoon to a gallon of water. So on the next slide, there is a difference between compost and mulch. So you can see compost on the left and mulch on the right. Compost is organic material that has already broken down, and usually you work it into the soil. Whereas mulch has not yet broken down. Hopefully it's organic. Hopefully you're not using these rubber mulches. Don't recommend it. So hopefully it's organic material that has not yet broken down, and you put that around your plants after you plant the plants. So on the next slide, you can see, if you look at mulch, it just has all these, you can almost see what it was, little shavings of tree and pieces of bark and maybe little pieces of pine cones that have broken apart and such. So it does all these wonderful things for you. It helps hold in moisture. In Harris County, it gets really hot in the summertime. So you really want to help reduce that evaporation of the water. It helps regulate the temperature of the soil, which helps regulate the temperature of the roots. There I go again with the roots. So in the summertime, when it gets really hot outside, that mulch can help regulate the temperature down 4, 5, 6 degrees. In the reverse, in the wintertime, it can help reduce or increase that temperature up 4, 5, 6 degrees, just enough to save the plant, make it happier. Mulch also helps control weeds, control unwanted insects. And one of my favorite things is if you're using organic mulch, it gradually breaks down and becomes compost. So you just work that into the soil. And then after you plant your next season's crop, apply some fresh mulch around it. So on the next slide. So all the cool season vegetables. Let's go ahead and bring them all up. So whether you're planting from seed or transplants, you're planting September through February. And we'll go ahead and move to the next slide. And after this slide, we'll take a couple of questions. So this is a great planting chart or planting schedule that most of the counties put out for AgriLife Extension. They put out their own calendar, planting calendar. So if you look down the left, there's a list of all kinds of vegetables. We have spring and fall vegetables that are listed. And then from left to right, past that, it goes from January through December. So if it's in dark green, then that's ideal time to plant. Light green is still a good time to plant. Now, if you're listening from another county, what you want to do is go to the county that you're going to plant your vegetables in. Wherever you're going to grow your vegetables, you want to get to the county nearest to where you grow your vegetables and look at their planting calendar. I've had the opportunity to grow for a while, for some years, and I still refer to this. And Skip and whoever helped him, they just put out this new list a few years ago. So we try to update it every so often. There are climate changes. So at this point, how about if we see if we can take a couple of questions?
Sure, yeah. And, we've had some good questions coming in, Teresa.
Great.
But they're getting answered by our Harris County Master Gardeners on Facebook, which is wonderful. So I think what I would like to do is take this time that as you're asking questions, we're going to try and answer them if we can in the comments, and we'll try to answer some on live here. But please also be careful about clicking any links. The links that are coming directly from Harris County Master Gardeners, those are good. If it says Harris County Public Library, those are good too. Those are coming from me. And we've tried to kind of clear them out of the chat, but occasionally somebody might post a link in there. We'll delete it if it's not a good link. So it should only be coming from Harris County Master Gardeners or Harris County Public Library. And Teresa, the questions that we got were answered. One question was, is pine straw the same as pine needles? I think that someone on the Master Gardener site said yes to that one.
Yes.
And then we asked somebody asking, what's the best time to start the seed for fall plants? And then lo and behold, our very next slide was our planting dates, which was wonderful. So it was great timing there. And to our viewers who are watching on the Master Gardener site too, it looks like our Master Gardeners are answering all of those questions as well. So I think we're doing great. Yeah, whoever's manning Master Gardener's Facebook page, you guys are doing a really good job. You're on top of everything.
Thank you, Chevy, and thank you, other Master Gardeners. I will continue with one of the answers as far as when to plant those seeds. If you're planting your seeds inside to transplant outside, a lot of people want to know about how far to back up to actually plant those seeds. So most people say 4 to 6 weeks. I like to allow 6 weeks, but 4 to 6 weeks, and I recommend 6.
Excellent. Well, that is great. So please continue asking questions. We love them. Like and share the show for today. And I'll be back in a little bit with more questions online. But Teresa, let's keep on going.
Okay, let's go ahead and get to the next slide. So let's go ahead and start talking about some actual vegetables. We're going to start with the cabbage. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide. So cabbage is Brassica oleracea, takes up a lot of space for a long period of time. So usually you're planting in about October. On that planting chart, you'll notice it's dark green around that time, and it's light green around that time, before and after that time. So you can do succession planting or, stagger your planting, but generally you're harvesting between January and April, depending on the harvest date. So not only is cabbage cold tolerant, but it actually has a defensive mechanisms. When that cold hits the cabbage, it sends sugars up into its leaves as a defensive mechanism. Cabbage has a tendency to hold those sugars. Other fall vegetables send sugars to their body or their leaves, but things like kale don't hold it. So if you harvest kale right after a frost, it's going to be a little sweeter than if you harvest it at another time. So let's go ahead and move to the next slide. There's all different kinds and colors and textures of cabbage that you can grow. The bottom left, I put my hand in there to show you that this is a smaller head of cabbage. Things to keep in mind if you plant, maybe there's only 2 or 3 of you in the house, why grow a big head? Takes over 100 days to grow, and then you can only use half of that cabbage, put the other half in the refrigerator. If you can grow smaller ones, if there's only 2 or 3 of you, and that way you're not having to fill up the refrigerator with the leftovers. So you notice in the middle one listed, that early golden acre, that's the one where my hand is in the bottom right, or excuse me, bottom left. So that's only a little over 2 months to grow. Some of the other ones are 80 something days, 100 days. So just things to keep in mind as you're growing things. And don't be afraid to change things up at the dinner table. The top left shows a colorful one. Some people call it purple. Some people call it red. It's nice and dark, so it's pretty. And then the textured one, this particular one is Savoy at the bottom right. So that one is also pretty. So you can change things up at the dinner table as well as having things taste good. So on the next slide shows, so it's Brassica oleracea. This is not a nutrition class, but if you just spend a couple extra minutes online with each vegetables, you can actually balance your own diet. So some of your vegetables, they're going to be a little bit more of the B complex, some that'll be a little bit more of C, and then all of the trace minerals that you might get from it. Now, what I list on my slides is what there's plenty of. But if you look at some of the nutrition websites, they'll have what they're high in at the top and what there's trace elements at the bottom. I don't usually even worry about listing any of those or calculating that into my growing, because there's trace elements of all kinds of vitamins and minerals in your vegetables. And then all your vegetables also have roughage, so it's good for digestion. So just keep that in mind. You can kind of pick out the vegetables that you like and want to eat, and then try to stagger what nutrients they offer you. So on the next slide, this is the Chinese cabbage. It's Brassica rapa instead of oleracea. If you go into the grocery store, real often they have it as the Napa type with an N, Napa type cabbage. And I love Chinese food, so I like to grow some Chinese vegetables and pretend like I can cook good Chinese food. But at least I'm trying. So let's go to the next slide. There's all different kinds of Chinese cabbage that you can grow in our area and other Chinese vegetables. So be sure and try those out. This is for the variety or subspecies is picanensis. And on the next slide, I believe we have broccoli. So broccoli is a very interesting vegetable in that you grow it for the head. Most people think you're just growing it for the head. And yes, you do. But when you harvest that head, cut it off where all those stems meet. So it's probably an area about this big around. Leave the plant behind. In a couple of few weeks, you'll see these, what they call side shoots growing at the bottom right. Those are side shoots. So let those grow for you. And when they get to about the right size, harvest those. Leave the plant behind again. And on the next slide, you can keep doing that until it stops giving you side shoots. Now, once it stops giving you side shoots, then you can pull up the plant and cut it up and put it on your compost pile. So on the next slide, all kinds of good vitamins and minerals for you. And let's talk about cauliflower on the next slide. So cauliflower takes up a lot of space for a long period of time. And we'll go ahead and move to the next slide. So this cauliflower is a white one. Thank you. So there's different colors of cauliflower. The white ones, you want to help keep it white. So this cauliflower is trying to self-blanch. It's trying to pull its innermost leaves over that head or those curds and keep them white, getting burned from the sun. So it's not able to completely blanch itself. So what you want to do is take the next innermost leaves that you can see around there and pull those, and we'll go ahead and scoot another slide until we get one more. There we go. And let's go ahead and get the guy's name. I love this photographer. He and his wife, he takes pictures for the Texas Gardener magazine, and his wife writes for it. And love that magazine. So here they have pulled the next innermost leaves over that head, and they are blanching it. That's what you're doing. You're blanching it. It's kind of like leeks. That's a whole nother story that we can't talk about today, but it's keeping it white and tender. So you can see they've left a whole bunch of leaves on the outside because you still have to allow for photosynthesis, but they've pinched off and used a clothespin. I find binder clips are really good. And you can start this process when the head is about the size of my fist, even smaller than that. So on the next slide, I had to show off. This is Violet Queen. I grew that out in the country several years ago. So on the next slide, the same photographer, I just couldn't resist putting this one. So this purple one is called Graffiti. Now, when you cook the purple ones, it turns chartreuse, like the two in front. Those are chartreuse. So that purple just kind of bleaches out. But if you serve your cauliflower raw to your friends when they come over, you can use it in a dip and it'll hold all the colors. So let's go ahead and move to the next slide, please. So the collards, kale, and kohlrabi, all three of these you can direct seed. All three you can transplant. So by saying direct seed, that means you're actually putting the seed into the growing area. Whereas a transplant, either you've grown it inside and you're putting the little plant into your growing area, or you bought it from a nursery and you're putting that into your growing area. So let's go ahead and move to the next slide. And we're going to kind of start and end with kohlrabi. So this is a picture of kohlrabi. So I like growing it from seed, to tell the truth. I prefer that. So when you put your kohlrabi into into the growing area, you want to make sure that if you have to thin out, some people overplant their seeds for germination ratio. You can't expect every single seed to germinate. So you might want to overplant and then thin out to where they're about 8 inches apart. Now that is the case with kohlrabi, but not with collard and kale. You want to make sure they have at least 15 or more inches apart. But with the kohlrabi, you can thin out to 8 inches apart, and be sure that you use all of the kohlrabi. Now, if you look real close at the bottom of the purple one, that is a root that's sticking in the ground. So you don't want to eat that. You want to cut that off, and maybe a little bit more where it connects to the plant. Put that in your compost pile. But all the rest of it is edible. So the ball is what you see in the grocery store. So most people think that's all that's edible. But the stems have a nice firm texture, so you can cut those up in manageable pieces and use it for a dip. The leaves can go in your soup, stews, stir fries. So the whole thing is edible. So let's move on to collards. Collards, I just think they're such an elegant looking plant. So any of your fall vegetables that grow in this mosaic form, you can eat just what you want for that particular meal. Maybe there's only 1 or 2 of you that you're preparing a meal for, and you only want 2 or 4 of the leaves. So harvest from the outside and let the inside leaves, the nice tender ones, keep coming up from the inside. And if you don't eat that much, it could last all season long. Now, if you eat a lot of collards, or you're feeding a lot of people, if you have room in your garden to plant several collard plants, then you can harvest 2, 4, however many leaves you need for each meal. Harvest some from one plant, from another, and let those innermost leaves keep producing for you, those innermost tender leaves. So on the next slide, this is Brassica oleracea. The subvariety is Acephala. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Moving on to kale. So this is winter boar kale, and it's growing in that mosaic form, so you can harvest just what you need from the outer part. And look at those tender leaves growing from the middle. It's just beautiful and delicious. The next slide is red boar. So it tastes to me, it tastes just as good as the winter boar, but I like this one a little bit better because we don't have a whole bunch of flowers blooming in the middle of winter. So when this plant gets a little bit bigger and that cold hits it, the leaves turn this purplish and the mid veins are kind of pink. So it's also pretty and it tastes good. The next slide shows Hanover salad, and the leaves aren't as big on this one, but it still produces a lot of leaves for you. This is probably the mildest kale that you'll find. When they did a test out in the vegetable garden several years ago, I believe David was still in charge, I got to try this one. It's a very mild flavor. And back then you couldn't find the seeds online, but now you can find the seeds online. So the next slide shows Toscano, been grown in our area forever, and it's just delicious. So on the next slide, all kinds of good stuff for you. It's another subvariety of Acephala. On the next slide. So this is a kohlrabi that they had just harvested when David was in charge of the vegetable garden. And it just shows you how beautiful. The next slide, there is a purple Vienna, and on the right is Cossack. There's also a white Vienna. Something that I found very interesting Vitamin K is good for blood clotting, and this has a lot of vitamin K. But if you're on blood thinners, this is working against your medicine. So keep things like that in mind too. So let's go ahead and move on to the next. So turnips and mustard. Let's start with turnips. So turnips are, and you can go ahead and pull up the leaves on the top too. Thank you, Brian. You just a miracle worker on computers, so thank you. So turnips fit into this category. There's a lot of root crops, but I categorize these 4 root crops together: beets, carrots, radish, and turnips. So all 4 of these, beets, carrots, radish, and turnips, you want to direct seed. So you want to put the seed directly into the growing area. You do not want to transplant. All 4 of these, beets, carrots, radish, and turnips, you want to harvest slightly immature. So, excuse me. So with purple top white globe, which is this kind of radish that's shown here, it's about 52 days to harvest. So I'm going to be looking into the 40-ish days to harvest that. Otherwise, the root starts getting kind of bitter. It can get very hard. It can start splitting on you. So you want to harvest all 4 of these slightly immature. And all 4 of them, you can do something called weekly row planting. So with turnips, think about how many turnips you might want per week. So rather than planting all of your seeds at once, harvesting all of them at once and filling up your refrigerator, you can harvest just what you want every week. Say you want 7 turnips every week. So go clear a spot out in your garden and go out there, say Monday morning, and plant for 1 row. You're doing 7, so 7 across. If you want to overseed for germination ratio, then overseed and be ready to thin out to 7. So a purple top white globe gets about this big around, say 2.5, 3 inches around. So you want to think from center to center. That's where you're putting the seeds. So say 5, 6 inches apart at least, and because you don't want them to be fighting for nutrition also. So plant your first row, tag it and date it. The next Monday, go out, scoot down 5 or 6 inches. Plant your second row, and then the next Monday, plant your third row. So when you get to about that 7th week, instead of planting another row, it's just under the harvest time. So check that first row, and it should be ready to harvest. If it is, harvest that first row. I'm from Texas. Tussle the soil a little bit, add a little fertilizer and tussle the soil a little bit more, and then replant that first row. Retag it and date it, and then the next Monday, that second row should be ready. So hopefully you see where I'm going with this. Once you start harvesting, you should be able to harvest every single week and get fresh turnips every week instead of harvesting all of them, putting all in your refrigerator, and for a week or 2 they're fresh, and then after that they're kind of And don't forget to eat the turnip greens. Absolutely delicious. So let's go on to the next slide. This is the purple top white globe. You can see why they call it that. And on the next slide, it moves on to mustards. So mustards have that wonderful bite to it, a little sharp bite to it. And on the next slide, there's all kinds of mustards that do real well in our area. Brassica juncea is how I pronounce it. So the next slide. Radish and daikon. So radish and daikons. Radish, part of that group of 4 that I keep in those root crops I keep together: beets, carrots, radish, and turnips. So you want to direct seed, harvest slightly immature, and you can do weekly row plantings. Now the top one is called cherry bell. You can see why it's probably called cherry bell. It only gets about the size of the ping pong ball, and along with it comes a faster harvest time. So you're harvesting in about 3 weeks or less. And so you need even less space in your garden if you want to keep having fresh radish. So on the next slide, it shows 3 different kinds of radish. There's that cherry bell at the top. Now the watermelon at the bottom is bigger, so it takes longer until harvest time. So on the next slide, something I found interesting about radish is I noticed, when you do research on nutrition, we always think of antioxidants being in berries. Well, radish actually it's high in antioxidants. That's one of the things that it offers. So I found that very interesting. On the next slide, let's talk about the Daikon. And if you don't mind putting the picture at the top as well, thank you. So I hadn't heard of the Daikon. So it's Raphanus sativus, just like the other radish, but the subvariety is longipinatus. I hadn't heard of this until I was out in the vegetable garden, and they were harvesting, and David, they were real busy, but he took a few minutes to tell me a little bit about this vegetable. And of course, I went home and got online and checked it out and went to my local H Mart and bought some Daikon. And oh my God, that was an eye opener. So the whole thing is edible. Most people, I think, peel it, kind of like a carrot or a potato, but the whole thing is edible. And the white part, I've used it in savory and sweet. So your eyes will be open if you've never tried this, and don't throw away those greens. That's good too. So on the next slide, moving on to lettuce. So lettuce, I don't even think about planting lettuce until the soil's starting to cool. So some people are thinking late October. Some of us are thinking more like early November. We can go ahead and move to the next slide. Now, lettuce needs light to germinate. Lettuce, you can either direct seed or you can do transplant. Either one does great. If you're direct seeding, you have these little tiny lettuce seeds. They're about this, itty bitty and flat, but let's just pretend this is a little tiny lettuce seed. You just want it to make contact with the soil and gently water it in, because the seed needs light to germinate. So, you think of seeds, you want to cover it with some soil. You don't want to do that with lettuce. And if you've ever grown lettuce yourself and you go out grazing, I love to graze in a fall vegetable garden. If you go out grazing with lettuce, you might notice a little bit of a bitter bite. Well, that's the sap inside of it. So if you want to alleviate that bitterness, if you know you want salad this evening, you can harvest your lettuce this morning, bring it inside, gently rinse it off, gently pat dry it, put it in a little produce bag, and leave it in there for 6 to 8 hours, and that should help alleviate that bitterness. So on the next slide, all different kinds of lettuce you can grow. And the next slide, you just want to keep away from the tight-headed lettuce, like the iceberg lettuce that we buy at the grocery store. That doesn't do well in our hot, humid climates. But there's a COS, C-O-S, B-I-B-B, any of the leaf type lettuces do very well in our area. And the next slide, there's even a freckles. One of the suppliers calls it speckles. So the next slide, let's move on to the umbel family. And we'll scoot past this slide and go to the next slide and talk about carrots. So carrots, one of those 4 root crops that I cluster together with beets, carrots, radish, and turnips. So you want to direct seed it. You want to harvest slightly immature, and you can do weekly row plantings. Lettuce seed is like carrot seed is like the lettuce seed. It needs light to germinate. So you want to take that little bitty seed and just have it make contact with the soil and gently water it in. You can plant these between October and December, and I've several of the master gardeners grow it through the year. So let's just say that's cheating. It's not really cheating, but it is going out of the boundaries of that planting schedule. It's just not going to get the cold. It's not going to get that sweet from the cold. So let's go ahead and move to the next slide. And there's all different kinds. I love the touchon. The next slide shows the orange rocket. Love that one. It actually looks better than this picture I pulled from the internet. And Danvers half is real good. Nantes. There's a whole bunch of carrots that do really well and taste delicious from our area. Dox carota. The next slide. So this is the last thing I want to talk about, and then we'll take some more questions. So if you cook, you probably love garlic, because garlic just goes in all kinds of different cultured dishes. Chinese, Italian, Mexican foods, just all it seems like all nationalities just love to have garlic in their recipes. So say you're inviting some friends over, and if you were past the pandemic and the recipe you're cooking for your friends calls for 2 or 3 cloves of garlic, and you look on your counter and, oops, I don't have any garlic. Fear not, you've got garlic growing in your garden. So you can go out, and the bottom picture shows the leaves of the garlic. So you can cut off a leaf from one plant, and you can cut off a leaf from another plant, and you can cut off a leaf from another plant, and only cut off as much as what you need to get that garlic flavor, because there's a lot of garlic flavor in those leaves. So only cut off what you need for that recipe that you're making. And to me, it seems like one of those leaves is about 1 garlic. I'm sure people will dispute that, but it's approximately one clove. So the top picture shows, if you don't cook, or if you've never grown garlic, that's a clove at the top. So the reason why you only want to cut off 1 leaf per plant is because you still need that photosynthesis. You still need that sunlight to hit the leaves of the plant. So on the next slide, yum, yum, yum. So this is a head of garlic. The whole thing is a head, and each segment is a clove. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So when you're planting your garlic, it does matter which side is up. So I've got some garlic here. Love to keep displays here. So what you want to do before you go out to your garden bed, you want to peel off. It's kind of like rice paper. Am I showing that? There we go. It's kind of like rice paper that you're peeling off. So you want to wait till you're out in your garden bed and peel off these rice paper layers of your garlic until you've got the cloves exposed. And then you want to separate those cloves. Try to do it gently. And each clove has a skin of its own on there, but leave that skin on. I've listened to talks that sound like they're very good gardeners, and they say to take that skin off before planting. But I like to leave that outer skin. If you've cooked, you know that you have to take this skin off. Well, I probably better not try that. But anyhow, so when you plant this, get all that skin off. When you plant this was the pointy end. So this was like that. Oops, there we go. This was like that. So, and this was the basal plate. That's the basal plate right there. That's where the roots came out. So you want the pointy end facing up, and you want to go down about 1.5 inches or 2 inches under oops, sorry, wrong way. So you want to go 1.5 inches or 2 inches under the surface of the soil. And you want to plant these for the distance apart is how big the original head was. So you think center to center. So that's how much you want to allow per head. Each clove should grow into a head, into all these segments. And that's what we got. So let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. And keep in mind that we have a different topic every month, and we do 2 talks every month. So next month we're doing gardening for beginners, and that's going to be a great talk. And then on the next slide, it shows our 2 links. So please check in there. There's so much horticulture information that you can find, not just on vegetable gardening, but you'll be amazed at what's in there. So let's, are there any other questions?
Yeah, we've had a lot of really good questions online, and a lot of them are getting answered. I had a couple that I thought would be good to bring about here. And first, I just wanted to clarify, I could go to HEB and buy a garlic clove, like cooking garlic, peel it off and put it in my garden, and it would grow?
I am so glad you asked that. No, that is something I failed to mention.
Ah, good.
In our area, it's like you knew that I left something out. In our area, we want to grow softneck. There's hardneck and softneck, and we don't know what HEB brings in. We know it tastes good, but we don't know whether it's hardneck or softneck. So I go to my local feed store. Now, some people order by catalogs, and you want to make sure that you're getting your garlic that's for the South. So it's softneck.
Excellent. I'm really glad I asked that. I was about to go to
Me too.
H-E-B and buy some garlic.
I have done that before. It grows, but it just doesn't fill out the same way.
Mhm.
So you really want to make sure that you're getting for your area. Now I go to my local feed stores, Wabash. I just
Mhm.
love Wabash. One thing about feed stores is they only have what will grow in that area. So whether you're growing this from seed, which they have all kinds of seeds to pick from, and now they have this huge area where they sell a lot of plants. And so they only carry what will grow in your area.
Hmm.
So I wait until, and I'll be calling, a few weeks in advance. Have you gotten your garlic in? Have you gotten your garlic?
Mhm.
And so as soon as they have it in, I know I can start planting my garlic. So thank you for asking that question.
You're very welcome. And then, I think we got time for one more. And this was a little bit of chatter online, but I wanted to have you have an option or a chance to jump in, talking about bugs and pests and how to keep them away from your yummy vegetables. What would you like to add into that?
Okay. I'm not one into insecticides, so I'm not the best person to ask about that. But keep in mind that more than 95% of the insects in your garden, around your garden, under your garden are good guys. So less than 5% are bad guys. So if you are going to use something to get rid of insects, some kind of chemical, try to stick. Now we're talking about something you're putting into your body. So, we're consuming this. So you want to stay as organic as possible. I don't push organic or inorganic when it comes to ornamentals or, whatever. But if you're consuming what comes from this plant, then you want to stick to something organic. If it's an insect, you can, if it's a caterpillar type bother, you can try BT. It's capital B, small t. It stands for Bacillus thuringiensis. So most people just, they don't want to sprain their tongue. So you can just ask for BT, and that's for your caterpillar type things. Something else that's organic is neem oil. It's a horticultural oil. So that's NEEM. And follow the instructions. Try not to use it in the heat of the day because it really is an oil and it can burn your plants. But those are two things that I use. And I really try to keep away from insecticides around my vegetable garden.
Excellent. Well, I think that's perfect to end on. There was some chatter about companion gardening as well in Facebook, but I think a lot of our Master Gardener posters talked about that in there. So it was really great that they brought companion gardening up as well.
Okay, and I know I've heard Chevy. She's my main sidekick here answering vegetable. She does a real good talk on companion planting as well.
Excellent.
So, yeah.
Well, I thought it was fantastic. I think that we got everything that we were out to do. We got some really good information. Teresa, I just want to thank you again so much for joining us today. And to all of our viewers, just another reminder, next week starts our Author Rama program. And I am putting a link right now into our Facebook that has all the information about it. So you should be able to go online and see on our Facebook page all the wonderful authors that will be joining us next week, Monday through Thursday. Please join us again for our next Master Gardener next month. I always have a lot of fun with these. Today was great. I like to eat, and it was so much fun learning about all the vegetables that I'm going to go out and try to grow so I can go eat them. And I'm getting ready for stew season, which is, what we're planting for, right? It's stew and soups, which is some of my favorites. Thank you, everybody, again for joining us, and we hope you will join us next month for our next Master Gardeners program. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.